here. If you could please stand with me for a moment of silence. Councilmember Mashburn, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. City Manager, do we have anything for the agenda that's going to be removed?
Yes, Mayor, we'd like to request that item 8A be postponed to the 2/11 meeting.
Can I get a motion, please?
Move approval with amendment.
Second.
All those in favor?
All right.
Approval of the minutes.
Move. Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. And we'll move to item 5, presentations. I see none. We can move to item 6, consent calendar. Does anybody from the council like to pull anything off the consent? Seeing none, I'll open it up to the floor if anybody wants to pull it up. Anything off the council? I mean on the, excuse me, consent calendar? Seeing none, I'll entertain motion.
Move. Second.
All those in favor? Aye. We'll move to item 7, business from the floor. This is the time set aside for anyone that wants to discuss anything not on the agenda and that's within the council's subject matter jurisdiction. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, Council. Julia Hahn. So I know that it was something that was discussed earlier, but I did want to bring it back up, is appointment or special elections for empty council seats. I would like to say that if a certain person gets elected for supervisor, his seat will be open, and you will know that in, say, April. That leaves plenty of time to have a special election in November. You have 0 additional cost, and it allows for people to vote on that seat as opposed to appointing it for 2 years. So that's my request, and if we can agendize that, that would be awesome.
Hi, Mayor. Just wanted to thank City Manager and Diana and Nolan for the dialogue that we had after the last council meeting about, just addressing the homeless issue. Appreciate their time and their efforts, and we're hopeful that, we can find some further solutions for our homeless here in Vacaville. It's not going to go away, obviously. We still have to deal with Prop 47, whether that'll happen soon, who knows. We have to deal with the opioid crisis, seeing new people on the streets, young ones all the time here in Vacaville. And the mental illness is still an issue, and affordable housing, and we're going to address some of that tonight.
During these sessions, we will be inviting community members living in affected neighborhoods to learn more about the environmental hazards around them and to participate in potential solutions that can lessen the impact of the zones. The goal is to strengthen community knowledge and participation and to activate the community into participating, because we realize the solutions without community input and interest are not viable. This data would then be shared with Call EPA and will be the basis to apply for future funding. If you have strong connections to the community in neighborhoods that might be affected, I ask that you get in touch with me to learn more about these neighborhoods from you all. Thank you.
A. We'll move to 8B. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. This evening, 8B is a public hearing discussing a resolution to approve the issuance of Community Development Authority multifamily housing revenue bonds. Similarly, Cantu from Housing Services and Danny Huerta will be here to present.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Tonight, Council is being asked to hold a public hearing and consider approval of the issuance of state multifamily housing revenue bonds for the rehabilitation of Gables Apartments located at 131 Gable Avenue. The bonds would be issued by the California Statewide Communities Development Authority, which the city is a member of. Bond proceeds would be used to complete much-needed renovation of the apartments and property overall, such as energy efficiency improvements, interior unit upgrades, new roofs, security cameras. Repayment of the bonds would be the sole responsibility of the owner, alleged Vacaville LP, and would be paid from rents. The maximum amount of the bond issuance is set at $15 million. There will be no impact to the general fund. Staff is recommending that council hold the public hearing and approve issuance of the bonds. And along with staff, Lu Yang Liu, representing the owner, Ledge Vacaville LP, and John Penkower from CSCDA are here to answer any questions you may have.
I see no questions. We'll open it up to the floor. Seeing none, I will. Are you coming down for this, or are you coming to see? Okay.
So this is the 15 million bond, correct? I'm just making sure I'm on the right item. Okay. So about July of 2019, the city council approved deferring 1.9 million in loans, which included $500,000 interest. And that was a 1999 loan that no.
And at your last meeting, we did have a lot of good feedback and suggestions, so we've added a fifth element there, which is really three parts: feedback, adjustment, and evaluation. So in that, when we go through the process, hey, let's get feedback on how did it work? How did you hear about this? What worked for you? Adjustment, this public involvement isn't static. 20 years ago, we weren't talking about Facebook. Now that's a big deal. Probably in 20 years, it may not even exist. So we may need to do something else in the future and evaluate how we're doing. So we've added that element to the plan. So our recommendation is that you adopt the resolution adopting the public involvement strategy. And that concludes my report.
When you talk about the feedback, adjustments, and evaluation, does this refer to, staff might think it's going to be a small impact, and you have that first meeting, or you send out those first notices, and then you realize, oh, it's much bigger than we anticipated. So you're getting feedback, you're making an adjustment to the plan, and you're moving that strategy to a wider base. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes, both
Okay.
during the process and after for the next one. Both of those, yes.
But it's important to do both.
Yes.
Like, you can do all you want afterwards, and it's important to do that, but if you're not adjusting along the way, then you're missing some opportunities to really have that community input.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Again, I absolutely love this. Huge kudos to staff. I think it's great. I'm really excited on the path that we're headed down here. A couple things that have been I've been thinking about since the last time we talked about this, which was just last meeting or the meeting before. This is fantastic. So I've been thinking about areas where this issue has kind of come up recently. One of the areas that this issue comes up, and looking at the matrix here, that the notice wouldn't probably work kind of in the instance that I'm thinking of, there's a Taco Bell that's being built on Merchant Street down the street. And so if you look online at all, most of the comments are about traffic. Most of the comments are about, why would you put it there? Traffic's going to be crazy. It's, And so a lot of folks just didn't know what it was and didn't know how it worked. So the traffic component is something to maybe sort of consider. And I know we hear lots of comments about certain drive-through coffee places that kind of back traffic up. So based on the noticing kind of guidelines here, those would be well under a 25,000 square foot commercial building. But the traffic impact, especially on major arteries, could impact a lot of people's commutes or safety or safe routes to school. So I'm not sure where we could address that in this document, but I do think to some extent maybe that's a learning lesson to keep an eye out for, or kind of to think about, because a lot of people may not be impacted by immediately living next to that facility, but may.
Because two of those schools, one is a middle school and the other one's a high school. And so there are a lot of folks traveling in that area that may not actually live close by. And so that became a citywide impact project where it doesn't look like when you just kind of look at the paper stuff that, oh, okay, just infill, boom, we're good. So I'm also hoping that within all of this, that the ordinance for noticing, I believe it was at 500 feet or something, that it becomes larger. Not that, that it just becomes a bigger area. Yes, I love the fact, the social media, yes, dovetailing with Vacaville Unified, awesome, 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 but also noticing the folks in the area. Once they get their questions answered and their fears quelled, I think things will come through here just a little bit more easily. Thank you.
Subject resolution.
I got a motion second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Unanimous. We'll move to item 9B, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Item 9B this evening is a presentation regarding facilities assessments and sports field park performance. As you may recall, in the 1819 Measure M budget, the council approved some studies to be performed related to our current recreation facilities and the potential for additional facilities. So tonight we have Carrie Walker, our Parks and Recreation Director, and Jim Simpson, who is one of our park planners, here to present the results of some of those studies.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Tonight we're here to present the status of two studies that were approved as part of the 2018-2019 fiscal year Measure M budget. One of those being a facilities assessment study and the other being a sports fields park pro forma feasibility and assessment study. With regard to the facility assessment, we did use consultant MIG. We selected MIG because we had already had an existing relationship with them. They are working on our Parks, Recreation, and Open Space master plan, as well as the Centennial Park master plan, so they're very familiar with the recreation needs assessment. During the time they've been working on those two projects, they've also conducted multiple pop-up surveys throughout the community at a variety of events, and they have conducted online surveys as well. So they're very familiar with the community needs and desires. With the Sports Fields Park Performa study, we did go through a formal request for proposal process and ended up entering into an agreement with Victus Advisors. And so with that said, I am going to turn it over to Jim Simpson, our park planner, who was the lead staff for both of these studies. And then we have Brian Connolly here from Victus Advisors.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Walker. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. Let me introduce you to our facilities assessment. And the purpose of this was really to take the needs assessment and other needs that we see through programming and class signups and things, and look at current facilities and how they might be remodeled, refined, expanded to better meet the needs as identified and as trends change and emerge, adapt to some of those in the future. And again, with the intent of following a process that's easy to follow and reaches conclusions that the decision makers can then make informed decisions from for the benefit of the community. So in this case, we looked at 551 Davis Street, or is sometimes called the Vacaville Recreation Center. It's where the gymnastics program is. It's where the Vacaville Ice Center is. And we also looked at Georgie Duke Sports Center and at Three Oaks Community Center. As you can see on the map here, the Georgie Duke Center is immediately adjacent to Andrews Park, just south of and adjacent to Sierra Monte, excuse me. And the 551 Davis Street is immediately adjacent there to the Highway 80 corridor. And the Three Oaks Community Center is at Three Oaks Community Park off of I think that's Marshall and Alamo Drive. What we contracted with MIG to perform was the task one would be the physical assessment of each of those facilities. So they had a team of architects, mechanical, electrical, and HVAC engineers on their team that went out to the sites, in some cases multiple times, to conduct an assessment of the facilities and then prepared a report for each facility. And then the next step, next task that they were contracted to perform were to create conceptual studies based on, again, the needs that we were trying to accomplish in terms of both programming spaces, recreation facilities, and then we also were tasked with looking for possible departmental admin space to replace the Eldridge offices currently occupied. And then the final and associated draft costs for implementation of each of those. And then the third task would be coming up with final recommendations and final estimated cost of implementation for each of those sites to bring forward for further consideration. MIG has completed the physical assessment and the report for each facility, which is why we're bringing this item before you this evening. In assessing 551 Davis Street, they looked at that and found that there are some significant structural, mechanical, electrical, and code issues with the entire facility. And that particular building is not owned by the city. The city leases space in that building with an option to purchase either the lease space and or the entire property in 2025. And so because of the extent of some of the repairs to the building, not necessarily to the portion leased by the city and utilized by the city, but because of the condition of the overall facility and the fact that the city doesn't own that, we made a decision and concluded that we did not want to proceed with any conceptual studies at this time for that particular facility. So we put that 551 Davis Street property aside to continue on with our conceptual studies on the other two. At the Georgie Duke Sports Center, again, the facility does have some mechanical, electrical, and structural code issues, but it is, for the age of the structure and the property, it's in good condition, it's functioning properly, it's being maintained and utilized for the public benefit to provide boxing, badminton, basketball, and various other indoor type of recreational pursuits. So the property is constrained, and other than the physical nature of the building, there's some topography issues across the site there. There are several plantings of mature trees around the building, and then there is the property immediately adjacent, which is Vacaville Unified School District property and not the city. And so there's some parking shared there right now. And all of those, again, allowed us to work within a framework to move forward on concepts. And Three Oaks Community Center is in a similar situation in terms of age. It's in a really good condition. It's functioning to the benefit of the department and the city in providing many, many different recreational programs and uses. But there are some electrical and code issues that still could be addressed with renovations and or reconstruction. The Three Oaks Community Park and Three Oaks Community Center properties do have some space to allow expansions and or relocations of the building if that's the direction that it ultimately takes. So again, we did instruct MIG to prepare conceptual studies for the Three Oaks Community Center property. And the second task, which was the development of the conceptual studies, is essentially complete. And we're only showing a few of those tonight. But what we did is we looked at the Georgia Duke Center and the Three Oaks Center, determined that there's limited options with Georgia Duke because of the school district property and some of the other constraints there, which we didn't want to pursue any further past the development concept that you'll see here. And then on the Three Oaks, again, there are several different directions that the potential remodels and expansions could take at Three Oaks. And we're at that point, again, where we don't want to overextend with the number of iterations until we get additional input from the decision-making bodies and advisory bodies. So at Georgia Duke Center, Sports Center, the area contained within the yellow boundary there is where we are looking at possible expansion to the existing center, which is in the lower right, lower left corner there. And this is the concept. I, again, apologize for the orientation change, but this is a concept where we are looking at adding a second floor of programming space to the existing building, and then a two-story wing attached to that with 2 indoor basketball courts conceivably inside that space with programming above. So again, it allows indoor dance, taekwondo, jiu-jitsu, karate, and the renovation of the boxing and weight training areas within the square footages that this concept is showing here. But because of the constraints on the parking and Andrews Park development, we did not proceed with any additional concepts to utilize space within Andrews Park or take up property that's not owned by the city at this point. On the Three Oaks Community Center, again, it's a larger site. We did include the existing skate park area.
Can you go back one slide, please? So for clarification, this outline in the yellow, does that also include what is now existing as the art heritage house facility?
Yes, so this is a modular building.
Right.
And this is the art center.
Okay.
Victorian.
Okay.
In this location. And again, this was just included in the concepts rather than extending out into the turf area here or other areas. So
all right,
there are further concepts to be developed.
Thanks for the clarification.
Again, at Three Oaks Community Center, the existing center is located in the central part of that yellow boundary area. The skate park, existing skate park, is in the southern portion, and then we have a redwood grove where there had been 2 different portable classroom units located over the years, and so there are utilities in there. There's an open space between the redwoods, so we included that to be considered as far as MIG's work on the concepts. The thought on the skate park area would be that it would be replaced in another location, and that somewhat fits in with the gentleman's comments earlier, that it would allow an opportunity to maybe provide an improved type of skate park. But again, at the concept level, we're looking at leaving it, removing it, different options. So this particular option would be an entirely new construction, and you can see that it does impede into where the skate park currently is. It also includes a separate building for the Parks and Recreation administrative function with a breezeway connection to the main building here. And the type of uses that we're trying to achieve with Three Oaks would be a functional catering teaching kitchen that's associated with the performance hall. That is something that's not possible currently with rentals on the for banquet rentals and parties. They're at the performance hall. The performance hall will be slightly larger, again, to meet a demand that can't be met through the existing facilities at Vacaville Performing Arts Center in Ulatis. And then we have divided classrooms over there right now with programming. So there's been a wall built down the center of one of the rooms, and have 2 programs in each half. And the concepts tried to provide additional programming space that could be dedicated, unlike what's available currently. This is option 1. Option 2, shown here this evening, is remodeling the existing structure, adding on to it, and then again a separate administrative offices, a single-story building. I should point out that option 1 here, this would be a 2-story building on the community center portion of it. So there are programming spaces upstairs on the 2nd floor as well as the ground floor. On this particular plan, this is primarily an expansion of the single-floor existing center, and then a administrative offices building approximately where there's a small structure out there that was a cogeneration plant that's currently unoccupied and vacant. So this one, the skate park stays in place. So like I said, there were many other concepts, again, studies done by MIG, moving different components around, and we just had to draw a line and stop at that point so that we can move further into the tasks here, which are to look at getting the advisory and decision-making bodies' input to move forward. So with that, we're at task 3. Task 3 is to be completed, and it will continue with the work that was being done with the conceptual studies in terms of refinement of a concept or concepts and the cost estimates to move forward into completion of the facilities assessment. And with that, I would like to pass this over to Brian Connolly with Victus Advisors, and he'll be able to walk you through the sports facility project.
Thanks. Good evening, Mayor, council members. It's my pleasure to be here. I am with Victus Advisors. We were the firm selected to conduct a pro forma analysis and feasibility assessment for a potential new sports fields park. Just to give you a little bit of background, we were engaged in 2019 to prepare this analysis, which includes a potential new outdoor multi-field, multi-sport complex at the intersection of Lewis and Fry Roads. Our focus was looking at multi-use fields, which means rectangular field space that can be used for a wide variety of different field sports. And the goal is to look at a facility that could be used both for local recreational use as well as competitive sports tournaments that can draw economic impact from throughout the region. In terms of the goals for our study, we looked at what is the market demand for this type of facility, both locally and regionally. What are some different concepts of what the site could be laid out to fit and could be included as amenities on the site? What are the financial and operational aspects of this potential complex? And then what could the potential visitor impacts be? Just a quick look at the site location that we were tasked with reviewing. So you can see that the subject property is at the corner of Lewis and Fry Roads, roughly, next to the water treatment plant, I believe. And that's a large, almost 80-acre property that is currently owned by the city. In terms of the tasks we undertook, the black boxes around the top of that chart show all of the research components that went into our study. We did demographic and socioeconomic analysis locally and regionally. We took a look at the local field sports programs and inventory of rectangular fields within the marketplace. We did an analysis of comparable facilities up to about a 5-hour drive range from Vacaville. We hosted a public information session at the beginning of our process to talk about what we would be doing and how the community can get involved in the process. We did interviews with local stakeholders, sports leaders in the community, and then also interviews with regional and national events and tournament organizers to make sure that we were addressing local demand for usage of the facility, as well as some of that regional and national potential visitor impact associated with tournaments. So based upon all those research components, we put together what we saw to be the demand for a facility like this and what that could translate to in terms of a facility program and an operational program as well, so physical and operational. From there, we had a number of different site concepts put together, and then we did financial and economic analysis on our recommended concept. In terms of the research tasks, I mentioned stakeholder groups. That was a key part of our process, making sure that we talked to a wide variety of different multi-use sports field user groups, locally, regionally, nationally. I think we talked to 18 or 19 groups overall. We also looked at what we call sports tourism drive time zones. So those are typical sort of day trip tournament versus multi-day overnight tournament drive time ranges. When it comes to sports tournaments, it's typically families in a minivan, traveling on the weekends to take part in these events. In terms of where Vacaville could draw from, it's conveniently located to Sacramento, to San Francisco, San Jose, and within a 5-hour drive of Vacaville, we found that there's a total population of more than 13 million people that could potentially be drawn on for tournament activity. We also took a look at comparative regional facilities. So these are all multi-sport rectangular field complexes in California. And we put this list together by talking to your local sports groups and where are they actually driving to go to tournaments. Mostly Northern California, Central California, and then some for larger tournaments were even going as far as Anaheim and San Diego areas. So we profiled all those different complexes, their strengths and weaknesses, and what that meant in terms of how a new facility in Vacaville could sort of fit into that regional tournament mix. Ultimately, our recommendation, looking at demand in the marketplace as well as looking at the potential site and what it could hold, our baseline recommendation was 12 full-sized rectangular fields with lights so they could be used in the evening as well as during the winter when the sun sets earlier. And we recommended that at least 2 or more of those fields, preferably 4, be artificial turf fields. The biggest benefit of the artificial turf fields is really for local use, especially in the shoulder seasons and into the winter, to be able to keep getting on those fields. We also, and you'll see as we show some of the concepts, we also had additional options on top of the baseline that could be added depending on budget. So, having one of the fields be a championship field, so you could host, the championship games there, with some seating capacity, having overlays for other emerging sports like cricket. And then we also looked at support areas and amenities, so concessions options, picnic table areas, restrooms, offices, parking needs, and then additional options on top of that, such as compatible uses from a sports and recreation standpoint, like an indoor field house with volleyball and basketball courts, or small-sided soccer fields, outdoor fitness equipment, splash zones, a lot of the things that we're seeing across the country that are more and more components of these sports complexes. So as I mentioned, we started looking at various options. So what you see here is really just the most basic option. So that's 12 fields on the site with the necessary parking for it. Not really much in terms of those other amenities. There's some bathroom pavilions, and that's about it. And a small concessions area on there. We then looked at options that included things like this one shows 4 artificial turf fields. It shows places in the middle there where you can. This gonna show up. Yeah, so you can see here. This is a children's area with a splash pad and children's play areas for different age groups. This is a larger concessions pavilion. Here's, if you wanted to put an amphitheater stage, kind of showing different uses for the space, even with the 12 fields on there, because it is a quite large space that you could include some other amenities as part of the program, again, depending on budget and need. Another option we looked at, this one has additional parking on site, and the reason we put additional parking in this option is because this includes a field house that has 4 basketball courts that can be converted to 12 volleyball courts with overlays. We looked at options for additional, small-sided soccer, sort of indoor soccer type models. In this case, we added fit core equipment and parkour, sort of American Ninja Warrior type equipment. So we looked at a pretty wide variety of options on top of just the baseline 12 fields option. Here. There we go. This is the next step was the financial analysis. So we put together an operating model and a pro forma for our baseline recommendation, which is a 12-field artificial turf, or 12-field complex, of which we recommend that 4 of those be artificial turf because of seasonality and artificial turf allows heavier usage as well from a local standpoint. Looking at that base 12-field model, with the minimum amenities required to go with it in terms of parking and restrooms and basic concessions pavilions. We estimated very, very strong demand for this. And the key to the demand we found is really the location of Vacaville within the market. It has convenient access to the Sacramento area, convenient access to the Bay Area, and can even draw from Central California. And all the different groups we talked to locally as well as within all those areas said if we could pick a spot on a map to have a tournament caliber outdoor fields complex, this would be it. Because it's a great spot for groups from Sacramento, groups from the Bay Area to be able to meet in a central location. The demand was very, very high. Even the fact, it's not just soccer. Everybody talks about soccer. It's lacrosse, it's rugby, it's all these different outdoor sports. We met with, the regional regional lacrosse association, and they're actually the largest USA lacrosse certified group in the country now. And they are constantly looking for more fields and better field locations for their events. So the demand is very high. We estimated that you could do as many as 40 annual tournaments, primarily on the weekends. We programmed space and time for Parks and Recreation, your Parks and Recreation Department, to be able to significantly increase the programming they're able to provide to youth and adults in terms of sports fields. And then additional local use, which is really rentals to groups that are scrambling to try to find space. And most of your local groups that we talk to that are field users are actually having to leave Vacaville to rent fields in other communities within about, for practices and local use within about 45 minutes. And then for tournaments, they're going, as far as 2 hours to find space. We also put together an operating pro forma for that 12-field model. This is our baseline model that showed if operated on a full calendar throughout the year, combining that local use with that weekend tournament activity, that we feel confident that it could be operated with a positive operating margin. And then lastly, we took our financial operating model and our visitor projections and ran it through our economic impact model to assess what we call net impacts. So the numbers we come up with are only the spending and the new dollars brought into the economy by visitors who are coming from outside of the county to take part in events, primarily weekend events held at this facility. What you see highlighted there is a stabilized year of operations. So that's really year 3 of the facility operating up and running, being at full capacity. And what we estimated then was that primarily because of that weekend visitation, you could generate new direct spending of over $30 million a year, which throughout the economy could support almost 700 full-time equivalent jobs with more than $23 million in wages associated with those jobs. And we also identified about 86,000 annual new hotel nights that could be driven just based upon that tournament activity we talked about. We also did an analysis of the hotel capacity and assessed that your existing hotel base, as well as a couple new that are coming online in the next year or two, had the excess capacity to be able to absorb that, which is a benefit to the community. And then we generated we estimated about 1.3 million at full operations of net new, incremental new city tax revenues associated with primarily with sales taxes and hotel taxes that could be generated each year because of the operations of this facility. Thank you.
The slides, the numbers that you're providing us come from other sports complexes that you use that data from, or some empirical data from?
The operating model?
Yeah, 27, 28.
It's a combination. So we don't just say this happened somewhere else, it'll happen here too. We have that knowledge from doing these studies all across the country. But then we tweak our model and develop it specifically for the demand that we find in your market and specific to this facility that we see there being demand for in your market.
Okay, that is the second part of the numbers I don't understand. So if it's not coming from complexes, real numbers from complexes that are doing this, you say some of it does.
Yeah, the two inputs are what we see at similar complexes and similar markets, and then what we see as the specific demand in your community.
Okay, that's the part I don't understand. Then help me with that. What you see is a specific demand in our community. How do you generate revenue out of seeing what our specific demand would be? That's the number. You're giving us a revenue number for your assumption of specific demand in our community. There's two parts of it. What you've seen in other complexes.
So our model, we plug in estimated usage, and this is the usage we've estimated, so about 17,000 facility hours.
And that number comes from what?
All of the research we did and the Parks and Recreation usage, the demand for local field rentals, and then the tournament usage within a 5-hour drive range.
Okay.
And then, so that's really what, plus, what the going rates are for field rentals within, within that 5-hour drive range around here. That's really what drives our revenue model, the top elements on here, so rental income and program revenue. And then on the expense side, that comes more so from looking at what comparable existing facilities do in terms of staffing and costs associated with different elements of operating the facility.
Okay.
Councilmember Mashburn.
Couple questions real quick. First one is probably for staff in the process. You identified some buildings that are currently in use that are going to be proposed to be removed or moved, the arts building for one. And then we heard earlier about the need for the skate park, and in a couple of these proposals we talk about removing the skate park. What plans have we made to replace those? What plans have we made? Where are we moving that to? And it's an active use in our community right now, as you heard earlier, that we don't want to lose.
Well, as mentioned earlier, we're in the very preliminary stages of these studies. So we haven't gotten into those nitty-gritty details. I can share that we are currently working on updating the Phase 2 master plan for Alpatch Park, and that park will include, the master plan includes a skate park.
Great. All right, then the second piece of my question is for Victus, and in your studies, if you can go to the slides that show the proposed, which I understand are very preliminary, all the proposed grass parks. On each one of those, just a suggestion. So I'm the guy, I got 3 littles at home. So I'm the guy who drives to all these areas within 5 hours to go to all the tournaments. And on every single one of these, there's a lot of parking. There's no bus parking. There's no RV parking. There's nowhere to even turn any of those types of things around in that area. And I can tell you, at every single one of these venues we go to, there are buses all over the place, especially if you're going to have a tournament of that size and significance. And all of the families that come with their RVs or their coaches, and they're trying to get in there with their kids, we got to look at the flow of that, and you may have to surrender some space in order to be able to accommodate the 17,000 folks you're talking about, because to have that number of people, there's going to be buses.
In our site planner, we had a couple different variations, even in the parking. This one you can see shows curbs and very delineated structures, and there's other ones where it's more open and lined and gives you more flexibility to be able to do things like that.
I want to make sure people are thinking about that.
Yep, absolutely.
Councilmember Sullivan?
I've got 3 or 4 comments, kind of / questions, I guess. So the first comment, I think, is that this is really exciting. So huge kudos to you guys. Tremendous projects. I know during Measure M, we promised the voters something big and amazing for them. And these 3 things you've kind of outlined tonight are pretty fantastic. The second question of that, and kind of a comment, I guess, / question, is the whole concept of like park equity and kind of being park poor. And so I know standards wise, the city has our own standards that we've set to kind of say that, you know, per resident, we should have X, and per this amount of field acreage and this amount of this and this amount of that. So I think that whatever we do has to kind of factor those decisions in. I like the 17,000 users, the half of them are local and half of them are from out of town. But I do think we need to think about the equity piece for locals first. I love the idea of the revenue and bringing folks in the motels, but you know, one of the things that I noticed right off the bat was that we're going to put in 12 lighted fields, right? And so we have folks from baseball here tonight that are struggling to have lights on their own fields now here in town. And so I want to make sure when we're considering this project, which I think is absolutely fantastic, the Fields project, we also keep an eye on equity. And so in my view, every kid in Vacaville should have a park they can walk to or ride their bike to, a place to cool off during the summer, and a safe place to kick a ball around. We need to make sure every neighborhood has that in tangent with doing this project as well. And so a lot of kids, especially from the Markham neighborhood, the Patem neighborhoods, they won't be able to access this location. So we need to see what we have in those neighborhoods for them too, simultaneously. And so I want to make sure we're considering all those kids that are currently here in town, that this won't be an option for them, and this won't be something they can access, but they have options or other resources kind of tangentially. The second comment I have is, especially on the Buckingham site, anything we can do with the school district there at that location would be great. So they're putting $17 million into Buckingham High School. I know there have been some preliminary talks about a shared kind of gymnasium, a shared facility. They use it during the day, we use it on nights and weekends. Any way we can save taxpayers a couple bucks and share a facility, I think would be great. I would love to enter into more discussions with them about, you know, how do we share a facility? How do we leverage those tax dollars? Also sharing fields. I know that's been kind of something that's been going away. And then my last comment kind of dovetails on Councilman Beatty's comment. On slide 27, you had the cash positive analysis. And on like slide 4 or 5, you had the 40 or some odd comps. Could you, because I kind of shared the same concept, like it's great to have calculations and analysis and algorithms to tell you what you think the proceeds are going to be, but could we actually call those various park districts and other projects and say, hey, what is your annual net gain for these 30 some odd comps? Because I really would like to see what the actual cash flow is for that group. and there were 30 or 40 examples that you guys shared, could we just give them a call and say, hey, what's your budget every year?
Yeah,
that-
you certainly could.
Awesome.
And we do that as part of our research as well. And, I will say it depends on how you operate it. There's communities where, they basically give the fields away to public use, and
Sure.
they budget millions of dollars a year to support that.
Totally, yeah.
And then there's others where, most of the projects we've done in the last 10 years, I would say 98% of them, most communities, cities, or counties that we work with take the approach that they want the facility to at least be self-supporting on an annual basis, just from a fiscal standpoint. So our assumption was this facility would charge rent for usage, typically hourly rent per field that would be, would not exceed the going rate. Essentially, we were fairly conservative with the rate for that, and that the goal would be to program it year-round, use the artificial turfs to program it year-round, use the artificial turf to be able to get local groups on there every day without beating up grass fields.
Sure.
And then also trying to maximize the tournament usage on the weekends as well, which is sort of the ideal model for ensuring that you have a positive operating margin at the end of the year. And that's not always the choice that communities make when they build an
I know it's
open
not
facility.
apples to apples, but if you can get as close as possible with some of the comps, that'd make me feel a lot better,
Yeah.
especially kind of in a deficit situation. It'd be nice to see that info.
Understood.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. Super excited. Great projects. I love the creative minds at this table. So thank you guys.
I had a couple questions also in regard to the major complex. So on the comps, are there other complexes that have 12 fields, or are they smaller in size? Are they larger in size? Is this an average size? What is it?
There is there are ones we looked at that have 26 fields. I believe we cut off for this analysis at least 4. So those are all complexes that have between 4 and roughly 30 fields.
Okay. And then in terms of, for the complex that, you're proposing and the number of annual visitors, how many people would it support on an average day? And I'm trying to think of the bus situation and think of some of the other situations. There's not a whole lot in there in terms of concessions. There's not a whole lot of information in there in terms of bathrooms, and maybe it's just too preliminary, but really, is there enough in order to accommodate the number of people that you anticipate, or,
We do have that detail in our full report in terms of the bathrooms and the ratios and the concessions options and the varying levels. So we have a basic concessions option all the way up to one where you essentially have a full service restaurant on site. So we have calculated that in our full analysis, and estimated for the parking requirements and the concessions and bathrooms for the max usage times when all the fields are being utilized and you have overflow, which happens, as I'm sure you know from attending tournaments. The other teams show up 30, 40 minutes before a game starts, and the other ones linger for an extra 30 minutes. So you have to plan for that max overflow as well. So we've taken all that into account.
Okay, great. And on the other 2 projects for the Georgie Duke property and also the Three Oaks, I am concerned about what happens with the art building that's there right now. Our community is very, we have a really big constituency for, art, and so it would be nice to know that we have a plan for that. And I know it's preliminary, but just stating that because I know we're going to get those questions after tonight. And I do like the concept of working with the school district in order to help share facilities. I know it always hasn't been easy to do that. But I think it's worth reevaluating, and I'll leave it at that for right now.
I have one more super obvious and probably kind of dumb question, but the proposed field location is literally right next door to the water treatment plant. I've never been out there on like a 105-degree day. Are there issues with odor or flies or other flooding or anything else that would be a byproduct of the plant? I mean, I just would hate to invest millions of dollars and then for a month of year because of odors or something, we can't have kids out there. I'm assuming we've tested all that or thought about all that, but is that something that we're factoring in? Yeah, okay, I see heads nodding in the back that no. Okay.
Yeah, there will be odors on certain days. That's a given. It's interesting in some of the preliminary research that I was doing before we retained the services of Victus is there are several multiple sports field complexes throughout the United States built next to questionable public facilities.
Gotcha.
Whether they be, waste treatment plants or other, again, public facilities. So it's a situation, I think, where there are tracts of land available for public use. For this type of complex, it's hard to find acreage that's level and developable in that sense. So, yes, there will be challenges during the summer when there's not a delta breeze blowing. There's some preliminary research of methods to help mitigate that, but you cannot deodorize, the general air to that degree, unfortunately.
Okay.
And we see that one of the biggest feasibility issues related with these complexes is often just being able to find the publicly owned land that's the right shape, the right turf quality, that's publicly owned, because if you have to identify an 80 or 100 acre plot of privately owned land and then go acquire it, that alone can often render the project financially not feasible. So a lot of these complexes are built in locations where they're able to get that land, and sometimes that might have some other uses like this nearby or next to it. And I think it's fairly common in order to be able to get the right size and shape and ownership of property.
And a follow-up to that question is one of the other byproducts of the plant is the purple water. So is that something that legally or within code or whatnot we could use? If, following the droughts and the local environment, water, being water conservation is huge. And so could we use purple water to irrigate the fields? Should we use purple water, or are other places doing that? Is that something we're thinking about?
Yes to all of those. There are, mostly in Southern California right now, because of the more stringent water restriction or water usage requirements down there, they are using reclaimed water for these type of athletic field situations. And quite frankly, that was one of the reasons that this site was even proposed initially, I think several years ago, before we were actually looking at it. It was potential use of the water coming from the treated water that needs to be disposed of.
Right.
And how do you dispose of that in a manner that can be done environmentally sensitively. And so that would be something we're looking to use to help with the natural turf fields, because again, a lot of these types of developments are going strictly to artificial turf because they can't afford to water their fields. This is a little bit different situation. The other one we're aware of and have already, we already know we're okay, is the salinity levels of the reclaimed water, which again in Southern California has created some operational nightmares. But our water tests within an acceptable range at the lower end of the acceptable ranges, and so we just need to make sure that if this proceeds to a design phase and construction, that the consultants are utilizing soil preparation and drainage and turf grass mixes that are appropriate.
Thank you.
I think we actually started talking about this property maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So it's really exciting to see that it's at this point where, there's been a lot of work behind making sure that it, number one, is a suitable place for these fields and for this complex, and that also there's some significant research done to see whether it would be feasible to move forward should there be the funding for it. I don't know if there's any more questions, but I would like to state that I'd like to move forward with authorizing the mayor to appoint 2 city council members. I, for one, would like to be a part of that, body, so I'm going to ask that we move it forward.
Mayor, council members, my name is Keith Thompson. I'm president of Bulldog Baseball Club that's been developing youth baseball players here in Vacaville for over 25 years. And as Councilmember Sullivan brought up, I have 2 concerns with the proposal. First of all, I think it's great. It's amazing. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. My first concern is we have an equally strong baseball and softball community here in Vacaville, and I don't see any baseball or softball fields in this 12 lighted fields. Currently in Vacaville, roughly 50% of our baseball and softball fields are lighted. This creates a utilization issue, creates a safety issue that's been brought up for years at the YSAT meetings, the Parks and Recreation Committee, community meetings, council meetings. And that brings me to my second point, which as much as I love the concept, I love the plan, I love the design, we're spending significant city resources to develop a new complex when we have current city facilities, fields that have safety concerns, namely lighting issues. Utilization is also a problem. We have a capacity issue here in Vacaville with both baseball and softball not having enough fields to play on. And the major impact of that is lighting. If we could play later into the evening with teenage players and things like that, we could increase our capacity dramatically. Yet, here's a proposal for 12 lighted fields. We can't get lighting on our current fields. For at least 2 years that I'm aware of, this has been brought up at the Parks and Recreation Commission meeting, and there's no funds, there's no allocation, and I mean, that's for you guys to decide, but it is concerning as a citizen, as a community member, to see all this money and resources allocated to these great 12 lighted fields when, 1, we're not considering the baseball softball community here in Vacaville, and 2, we're currently struggling to provide baseball and softball complexes for our youth, and consistently shot down, and not having enough lighting or safety issues or things. Any major improvements to our existing fields have always been denied. And so that's a concern. So I guess I would ask you to at least, further evaluation of the current demand on our current city fields by our current, much less travel and people coming in from outside of town, but our current population using our baseball and softball fields, evaluate that demand, and then also an assessment of the safety impact on our current fields if we don't do some of these improvements. Thank you.
So I think in response to our speaker that this is what this committee would be doing, is looking at that in addition to what has been proposed so that we make decisions that are good for the entire city.
Good evening, Mayor Roulette, members of the council. I'm Melissa Laughlin. I'm the CEO of Visit Vacaville. First of all, I want to thank you so much for even considering this project. It's clearly one of the biggest things that could happen for tourism in our community in the 12 years that I've been here, and just could be just a real boon to our economy overall. I did want to make a quick disclaimer. I hear absolutely, Nolan, what you mentioned about our current fields and what the gentleman just spoke about as well. I think there's kind of a misconception sometimes that because I advocate on behalf of our visitors that we're not here trying to build a better community for our residents. I will say that if we build a better community for our residents, the visitors will come. And so I think that's really important to state, that we're trying to build a better community for our city, and the visitors in turn will enjoy what we have built for ourselves. So I think that's really important to state. I am tonight, though, here advocating on behalf of our visitors, of course, and wanted to just talk a little bit about the impacts to our local economy and what it would mean to our tourism economy. Of course, it would mean a huge boon to our hotels. And we currently have 14 hotel properties in Vacaville, with another one already moving forward in the process, and another couple hopefully behind that. Our hotels are exceptionally busy Monday through Thursday. They really struggle on the weekends. We need to give them some reason, especially as we're approving new hotel properties, to survive on the weekends. This is a great reason for people to come here on the weekends. And really, not only are we looking at the hotel impacts, but we're looking at all of these visitors that would come in for tournaments, need a place to dine, to fill up their gas tanks, they'll shop, they will spend money in our community. And so those additional impacts to our community and our general fund are obviously really important to our community and may even help pay for things like lights at our other fields. Over many years, in my early days here, we actually had a sports sales manager on our team. They were out going to trade shows, bringing back these amazing leads for great tournaments and great events that we could host that would really sell out all of our hotels and impact our community as a whole. Unfortunately, the lack of facilities, we weren't able to accommodate. We eliminated that position on our team. You know, I'm not sure what the long-term plans are for sales of the facility, but if we get to that point, we want to make the commitment on behalf of Visit Vacaville to partner with Parks and Recreation should they wish to have it. You know, I think our ability to go out and sell a facility such as this is pretty great. So we would make the commitment to hire a sports salesperson again and bring that back on our team to help sell the facility. Again, we would not step on any toes, but we would like to be a good partner for the city in that way and help bring in tournaments that, of course, really impact my hotel properties. We just think the impacts of this particular facility would be so great, not only for our hotels, but again, for all of our local businesses. And again, just really thank you for considering it. Sure.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members, assembled staff, and citizenry. My name's Ed Forrest, and I moved here with my family in 1986 when my oldest was 8 months old. Over the course of the next 20 years, did a lot of traveling to sporting events for competition, taking my children and others' children to places as far-flung as Chico and Reno and Stockton and San Jose, and availing ourselves of restaurants and overnight accommodations and shopping because they were teenagers at the time. It was quite common. Anyway, I think it's an opportunity that lends itself very well to Vacaville. Our logistic location. Tourism is an interesting entity, and I serve on the board of Visit Vacaville, and I also serve on the board of the Economic Development Advisory Committee. And so I get this from more than one aspect. It's a great opportunity for Vacaville. We're uniquely situated to take advantage of this kind of facility. I think that it would avail itself not just to youth, but also to adult sports, and that can be a tremendous boon to tourism. I think the impact would not be limited, and I noticed on slide, one of the slides there was the local use, and that was very important in the discussions that we had at Visit Vacaville because there was an awareness within that board that this has to serve the community as well as the tourism industry. Also, I served as treasurer for Measure M, and this proposal serves very well in the intent of servicing the community that was implicit in Measure M. So I thank you for your time today.
Good evening, Mayor Willett and council members. My name is Sean McMahon. I'm a longtime Vacaville resident. I also have the privilege of sitting as a commissioner on the Parks and Recreation Commission. This project really excites me. This is going to do great things for Vacaville. We have a golden opportunity here. For years, I have thought to myself, we have missed this opportunity. As a father of two young girls, I have traveled to Sacramento, I have traveled to San Jose, I have traveled to San Francisco to play sports. Why not here? We are geographically in one of the best areas for that. We are missing an opportunity. Let's be known as a great sports town with great outlets, with great restaurants, with great hotels. I'm not really excited about the location of it. However, on the other hand, I think it's brilliant. Instead of piping this water all the way through town, let's pipe it adjacent to the field right there and let's irrigate those fields. As we know, water is one of the biggest expenses in maintaining those fields, so I think it's brilliant. I think we can be on the leading edge of that, and we can be a model for that, for other cities to look at. Talking about being equitable with sports fields and baseball fields and softball fields and soccer fields. As a park commissioner, I see that we have approximately 7 softball fields, 15 baseball fields throughout the town. That's 22 fields. I count 4 soccer fields and 1 at Owl Patch. That's 5 soccer fields. Let's be equitable. Okay? Let's make sure that everybody is well represented at the table. Maybe we don't need all 12 fields with lights on them. Let's think about half the fields with lights on them. Let's look at putting lights at other places if needed, softball or baseball fields. But let's be equitable. We definitely have an opportunity here, and I hope we take advantage of that. The feasibility study shows that Vacaville can benefit from this. Often we are reactive to, as we grow, we're reactive here in town. Let's be proactive with this. So I would strongly encourage you to consider this and move forward with it. Thank you.
Council members and mayor, I'm Tony Smith, longtime resident of Vacaville. And I was going to say, we used to use the school district properties years ago. We had tournaments. We had a qualifier, softball qualifier, but when I worked for the city, we used Nelson. At that time, we didn't have Owl Patch, but we used Wood High School. So we had an agreement with them years ago, but we kind of got away from it because there was problems. But we used to use Vac High's gym for basketball. It was a joint use thing, and we used to help them out. They'd help us out. So I don't know if we could go back to that or not, but it'd be a good idea if you could. That would help a lot. The other thing is, did we ever get to a citywide assessment in this city? I mean, it's a logistical nightmare. All these different accounts for every department. I mean, Nelson Park, you go inside the gate, you go outside the gate. It's 2 different codes. The timesheets are a mess. It was hard to work with when I worked there. So I don't know if we ever got to that, but I think if everybody paid an assessment, everybody in all over town uses all the parks and all the recreation facilities, we could actually cut down on the amount that some people do pay. Okay, so I think that would be a good way to go there, a citywide assessment. We got more people now, I think it would pass because it's, there's more people using facilities now than ever. So I think it would be a good thing to do. And we haven't got to that, I don't think yet, but I think we should go there. That would help with all this budget problems. The other thing is baseball. I'm involved with baseball. We're using some school fields right now, okay, which is really hard because the gates are all locked. You have to get permission, But I think if we go that route and get permission from these schools and have some kind of agreement, it'll make everything a lot easier. The other thing is the baseball fields, he was right earlier about the lights. There's no batting cages. There's a lot of them don't have lights. The other thing is the parents and the coaches do most of the chalking and dragging in these fields. Now, I don't know what your position is, but if somebody falls off that gator and these kids with a drag on there and they get hurt, I don't know where the city would be standing there. And so they don't prep them anymore. We used to prep the fields during work, first morning, game, and all the coaches had to do was touch up the fields. But they don't do that anymore. So we've cut services, basically, when you really think about it. I mean, from prepping the fields to the senior rates on water, there's been cuts. People don't realize that. But I've been here a long time, so I've seen all that happen over time. So I don't mind doing the fields, but I think about liability and all that. When I was working for the city, there's no way I'd let kids get on that stuff, okay? I mean, nothing against the coaches that do that, but I wouldn't take that risk. So to make a long story short, places like George Duke, there's no parking up there if they're going to expand that. What's that?
You're out of time.
Oh, okay. Well, these are just a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. Hopefully we can improve on this. So, all right, thank you.
So the thing that I'm noticing about a lot of this conversation, and as a person who grew up doing traveling sports and, has actually played on these softball fields, et cetera, I feel a little bit inclined towards knowing about what I'm talking. The outdoor fields seem more like a investment property, less so a community park. It may be used for that on occasion, but you have the soccer fields, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, you'll get some parents who don't have to travel one weekend out of 52, which is awesome. Don't get me wrong, but it doesn't seem like it is community focused. Quite frankly, it's barely in the city. It's so far away. You're talking about there is no residential area that can walk to this. This is going to be a drive-only kind of place. With that said, you're also going to have people who have no access to any sort of town resources within that area because, quite frankly, they're going to be stuck there. So I do see some issues with the outdoor space, but overall, I think it's a good idea in the sense that I think it could be a good money-making opportunity for the city. But at the same time, I think calling it a community park feels ingenuous. The second part would be the indoor facilities with the Performing Arts Center. I don't understand why you guys would be looking at creating a whole entire new Performing Arts Center when there is already a Performing Arts Center that could be renovated and actually brought up to look great and already is in use, has things going on there. I think that the cost for new building is pretty high, and that should be taken on with the seriousness that it entails. I do think the gymnasiums are great, but again, pairing up with high schools, pairing up with other schools, trying to figure out a way. I mean, that's what, when we did adult leagues, when my mom did adult leagues when I was a kid, that's where all of our stuff was at the high school gym. Everybody managed to figure that out. As for the softball, baseball fields, they need renovation. They do. They're not great. You go to any one of those parks, they all need work. Lights are a huge issue in actually having some sort of community usage of it. And since you do have the adult leagues as well as the kid leagues, you probably should take a look at that.
Mayor, council members, Till Brandy, resident of Vacaville for about 6.5 years, vice president of Bulldogs Baseball Club. I'm also a manager for 12U travel team, so I see this as a great idea, great opportunity for the city of Vacaville to have a major complex here. I've been getting asked specifically from organizations like USSSA, All World Sports, that this would be a great spot. Why is Vacaville basically not doing this? We've been asked by other teams to have tournaments here. So this is a great conversation, great start. Obviously, we'd like to see some baseball and softball fields up there. One of the suggestions I do have is that the city council go to places like Sparks, Nevada, where they have Golden Eagle Resort, which is a beautiful place and does all these sports that they're talking about in one location. Mather is another one. Mistland Fields, which I believe was on his list. Woodland, not that far from here, also doing soccer and baseball fields. Get out and take a look at those places. I think that'd be good for the council to see what our neighbors are doing and what their revenue is from it. But all that said, I think that what Keith brought up about the existing fields, we've been down here to talk about the lights on the existing fields. Our local organizations do need to have lighting on the field. We're suffering from that. So I just want to make sure that we definitely look into more lighting to the fields that we currently have and maintaining them properly. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members. I'm D-Mac McMillan from Vacaville, and I'd like to just reemphasize what was brought up on the slides of the potential of the 86,000 annual occupancy for the hotels, local hotels. but also just to reemphasize what was said earlier by the gentleman that this is a really good use of Measure M money, and it actually has a return on investment. So thanks for your consideration. So.
Hi, my name's Alicia Minion, and I'm a resident of Vacaville, and I'm really excited about this idea, and including all the improvements, proposed improvements to the other parks, and along the lines of what some of the council members said regarding the funding, I was wondering if the consultant, when they reviewed the other comp sports parks, if they had an understanding of other forms of, all the forms of funding that park. So if it wasn't self-funded, did they use any special taxes to supplement the funding? And I noticed at least one of the parks looks like they had a corporate sponsor. It was called Patelco Sports Parks. Patelco, I believe, is a credit union, and that was in Pleasanton. And I was wondering if you know what role Patelco played in helping fund that park. And maybe that's something that we could do here. Maybe it could be a corporate sponsored park. Maybe it could be the Travis Credit Union Park or some other local business. And then in terms of, you know, being worried about some of the years it might be non-profitable, maybe finding a way to increase the reserve requirements so we can make, just get a buffer to shore up the years that the park is not profitable. Thank you.
I had two quick questions, one comment, kind of one question based on some of the comments that just came up. So the first question is, it is kind of a remote location, but I know right now, for example, we're doing all these different plans for bike paths to get to downtown to have bike connectivity. It would be great, especially with all the development going on in that part of town, to actually map out some space maybe for a bike path out to that location so people could bike in and out. I could totally see my little guy hopping on his BMX and riding out there, you know, safely, obviously. But it would be awesome to kind of be forward-thinking in that sense so that we don't build houses or something else in the interim to maybe make a safe bike trail that direction would be great. The second question, and Carrie, I'm not sure if you could answer this or this might be a Ken question, the assessment piece. I've never really thought about that or heard about that, or what is, can you give me like the Cliff Notes version of how the assessments piece works in like a minute or two, or is that way too complex for today's discussion?
Assessments. I'm not.
So so right now, are there individual assessment districts? The gentleman, Mr. Smith, made the comment about a citywide
you're
assessment.
talking about the
like
lighting and landscape?
Right, like can you give us like the quick 1 minute rundown on how it exists today and what a citywide assessment would entail or look like, or is that a much larger discussion?
Actually, I would have to defer to our public works director.
Maybe that's an offline question. Okay, I'll ask her, I'll get Jeremy offline, sorry. Sorry.
Hello, good evening. Mary Vasquez. I'm the Vice President of Vacaville Bobby Sox.
And Sarah Case, player agent, Vacaville Bobby Sox.
We just wanted to echo some of the concerns that the Vacaville Bulldogs Baseball Organization brought forward in terms of lighting and utilization. We use Nelson and Larson as well as Vacapina. Larson obviously is not lit, and so we're unable to utilize that with all of the girls that are registered in our leagues. And just in terms of safety at Nelson and lighting at Nelson can be very spotty with all the trees, and so we have voiced these concerns obviously with through YSAT and with the Parks and Rec staff, but I just appreciate Councilmember Sullivan's comments about equity. I think it's really important that we do look across the board at our existing facilities before presenting such a large-scale project. The other concern, just in terms of visitors, bringing visitors forward to our town, Vacaville, Bobby Sox is the only local organization. Fairfield has their Bobby Sox, but we are unable currently within our current contract to accept non-residents. And so girls from Dixon, girls from Travis Air Force Base, girls from Fairfield who may not want to play in Fairfield, but come and commute to Vacaville to play in Vacaville, we're unable to a lot of times accept those registrations. And so, it's great to be able to encourage visitors to come outside of town, but in terms of offering softball beyond residents is really challenging for our organization.
Yeah, just real quick, I wanted to echo the sentiment of let's be equitable also. Although there are 7 fields, the one league that is in contract with the city, Bobby Sox, is allocated Nelson, the only 2 lighted fields. We don't get Owl Patch allocated. And Larson currently is undergoing some changes, but is not lighted, so we cannot utilize that. As far as equity goes, I have been on this path for other options for softball also. The girls in our town are very underrepresented, and I feel like this should be a part of, looking at this planning of all these new things that are happening and promoting, soccer. I think it's great. I think it's a great complex, great idea, and all of that. But the kids that are already in our community need to be accounted for first and foremost. So I'd like to see better representation for the girls in these plans, options for them, not just the one league that only runs the one season.
I would also encourage you to look at the comps in the other towns that they used and see if they're comparable in size to Vacaville and not like San Jose, right? Thank you very much.
Thinking also about Owl Patch Park, and am I correct that that's a state-owned property? And
Correct.
so, are there, I know you mentioned plans for some expansion at the park, and how does that work with some of what we're hearing from Sacramento right now about the governor's plans for utilizing state property for some of his goals and objectives?
We have been in contact with the Department of General Services, and we've been assured that these properties, that it's Larson, Keating, and Patch, which are all state-owned, that they're not being considered.
Okay.
That's what it's been conveyed to us to date.
Okay. So with all the questions in regard to lighting for both baseball and softball, and all my kids played baseball and softball here locally, some of my grandkids as well. So I'm wondering whether, I don't recall anything in Measure M stating that those funds could not be used to improve existing. So I'm wondering whether there's been actually any research or analysis done of what it would cost to make some of these improvements to our existing facilities so that they could be utilized more, more than they are now because because of lack of lighting. So I'm wondering if we could, get some type of report back on that so that it helps us make decisions.
I'm going to close public comment and listen for a recommendation.
So I'd like to make a recommendation that we move forward with the appointment of 2 council members and 2 Parks and Recreation commissioners to continue this discussion, to bring back some type of recommendation to the council.
I'll second.
Motion and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We will move on to item 9C. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Business item 9C this evening is a presentation of the results of the June 30th, 2019 actuarial evaluation presentation related to other post-employment benefits. Our admin services team of Ken and Jessica are here with our actuary, Eric, who will be giving the presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of the council. As the city manager mentioned, we have our actuary who's flown in from Virginia to present the 2019 OPEB valuation. Just some background on our actuary and the firm that he works for. So Milliman is among the world's largest providers of actual services. The firm has actually performed the city's OPEB valuation since 2008. Eric specifically has been involved with the city's OPEB valuation since 2013. The actuary has more than 20 years of actuarial experience. He's been involved with OPEB valuations for over 100 government agencies. Has been a speaker at Virginia GFOA conferences as well as regional BGFOA training sessions. And with that, I'll pass it over to Eric.
Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members.
Hit it one more time. There it is.
Sorry, thanks. Happy to be here for my second appearance before you all to discuss the city's retiree medical plan and benefits. The first three slides are just terms that we wanted to lay out, and knowing that not everyone speaks actuary, I'm not going to read point by point. I'm just going to hit on a couple points from each slide that are of particular interest. On this slide, I want to talk about the actuarial liability. That is the funding target of the OPEB plan. That is what we're trying to fund. It's the present value of the plan benefits offered to both future and current participants, retirees and future retirees, that's based on service earned prior to the valuation date. In any pension or OPEB scheme, the goal is to fund benefits over an employee's working lifetime. So you want to at least be funding the benefits accrued to service to date. So when we talk about unfunded liability, it is the unfunded actuarial liability that we're referring to. We can go to the next slide. On this particular slide, the normal cost, that is the value of the benefits that employees earn during a year, during a 12-month period as they work towards retirement. As I mentioned earlier, the unfunded liability, that's just a difference between the plan's actuarial liability and the actuarial value of assets as of the valuation date. In the case of the city, the actuarial value of assets is equal to the market value of assets. There's no smoothing that goes on. For accounting, that is required. It is not required for funding, but the city has chosen to use market value as their funding value. And then also, the actuarial determined contribution is the sum of the plan's normal costs, which again is the cost of benefits accruing during the year for active employees, plus the amount necessary to amortize the unfunded liability. Any good or actuarially sound funding policy or contribution must do at least two things. It must cover the benefits that are accruing during the year, and must also have a plan to fund the unfunded liability. And in the case of the city, their actual determined contribution does achieve both of those things. It's paying for the normal cost, and it's amortizing the unfunded liability, which you can think of the unfunded liability as missed normal costs from past years. That's what creates the unfunded liability. But they're amortizing this unfunded liability over a closed period of 19 years. And the closed period is important because it means if you used an amortization period that never decreased, you would never pay down the unfunded liability. If you used a period that's always 30 years with every valuation, you would never pay it off, much like a mortgage of a house. If your mortgage reset every year to be amortized over 30 years, your payments would be lower, which I guess is a good thing, but you would never earn any equity, you would not accumulate any equity in your house, and you'll never pay off this liability. So the city's contribution does achieve both things to make it actuarially sound. To discount all the future payments back in today's dollars, we used a 6.5% investment return assumption, which is based on the city's CERBIT asset allocation strategy, which is strategy 1. It is the most aggressive of the 3 strategies that the CERBIT offers. It is a 0.25% decrease from 2 years ago, and that is basically because our capital market assumptions, Milliman's capital market assumptions, which are set by Milliman my colleagues who have expertise in the investment arena. So based on our capital market assumptions, we think that the investment allocation of strategy 1 results in a long-term rate of return that's gone down 25 basis points since the last time I was here. Finally, the implicit subsidy, which is offered by the city's OPEB plan. the city offers two kinds of subsidies. One is the actual premium the contributions it makes towards retiree premiums they actually give the retirees. They're actual dollars you can see. They also provide an implicit subsidy to pre-65 retirees because the rates that pre-65 retirees pay are blended with active employees. Active employees and pre-65 retirees pay the same rate. So active employees are younger, healthier on average, are subsidizing older, somewhat less healthy pre-65 retirees. So that subsidy that you don't see it come out in actual dollar checks to retirees, but it's still there. That must be recognized by the plan, both according to actuarial standards of practice and by GASB. So it's not something that's unique to the city. It must be recognized by OPEB plans over the country. So what has changed since the 2017 valuation? The plan's unfunded liability went down by about $3.5 million. The actual liability increased by $11 million, but the trust assets increased by between $14 and $15 million since June 30, 17. The actuarial determined contributions for the next 2 fiscal years, and in this particular slide, the 9.9 and the 10.3 million with the 2017 beside it, that represents the 2018 and fiscal 2019 actually determined contributions. For fiscal 2020 and 2021, the contributions are a little bit lower than what they had been. The discount rate, as I mentioned, decreased by 25 basis points. And in general, as interest rates go down, liabilities go up. So the plan's liability did increase because of the discount rate decrease. But as we'll see in a couple slides, there were other factors to help offset this increase. What went up from the prior valuation? Well, as I just mentioned, is the trust assets went up by $15 million. That's a combination of trust contributions the city made directly and favorable investment performance during the last 24 months. The actual liability, your funding target, increased by a little over $10 million. Some of that's due to interest, a carrying cost on a liability. It decreased because benefits were actually paid to retirees. But there's some other factors that caused this change that we'll discuss here shortly. And the number of covered participants increased by about 3% from about 950 to about 980. So this year I come bearing some additional graphs that I did not show 2 years ago, last September, or 2 Septembers ago when I was here last. Thought it'd be a good idea to show where the city was and where they are now with respect to funding that target liability I talked about, the actuarial liability, the value of benefits based on service earned to date. So as recent as July 1st, 2015, the plan's funded ratio was 12%. But in the 4 years since, they've increased that funded percentage from 12% to almost 33%. Some of that's due to increased employer contributions due to the funding policy that they've instituted. That's the primary reason, I should say, why I think the status has improved is due to that resolution where the city is now required to contribute 100% of that actuarial determined contribution. It wasn't always 100, it has ratcheted up since the resolution was first enacted. It was, I believe, 70% early on, 80, 90, and now it will be 100% from here on out for every fiscal year going forward. I thought it would also be a good idea to show where does your liability lie with respect to pre- and post-Medicare retirees and covered dependents. You can see that most of the city's liability lies in the post-65 space because of the generous subsidies they provide to post-65 retirees, not just a retiree, but their dependents. Almost 60 million of the plan's 116 million liability is attributable to post-65 retirees. That's both retirees that currently retired and will retire in the future. 60 million will be attributable to benefits they'll receive in their post-65 lifetime. About 51 million, 52 million will be attributable to pre-65 benefits for both future and current retirees. And this also includes an implicit rate subsidy that I talked about earlier that you don't see, but because actives are subsidizing the pre-65 retirees and their dependents, there's a liability created for that subsidy. So as I mentioned, the actual liability increased by about $10 million from the last valuation. Some of that's due to the carrying cost, offset by the benefits that are paid. Here are some other reasons why that liability changed. The investment rate assumption decreased 25 basis points. As I mentioned, that's going to increase your liability, increased it by $3.5 million. We updated some of our demographic assumptions for mortality, disability, withdrawal to be consistent with the most recent CalPERS experience study. That increased the liability by about $1.5 million. And then two factors decreased the liability, namely our health-related assumptions and also just updated census data from June 2017 to this year. We had an unexplained difference of about $0.2 million, which isn't too bad, considering the liability of the plan is $116 million. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. That's the way it shook out this time. That those numbers aren't always this small, but risk valuation turned out that was the case. Everything sort of offset one another, so the unexplained gain or loss was about $0.2 million. And finally, the last 4 slides, or 4 or 5 slides, we're going to talk about the new retiree medical tier that the city implemented, Tier 3, which I want to show some examples of how this new tier will help save the city money, how it will reduce costs. So to lay the ground rules for these examples, I just want to lay the assumptions that we used. We're going to do 2 examples. The retirees are subject to the vesting schedule, which is Tier 2, and will receive the maximum city contribution under this particular tier. Under Tier 3, if this retiree would be subject to Tier 3, they would receive the service-based contribution of $200 a month. In a family coverage scenario, we assume that the retiree will cover children until they're age 26. We also had to make an assumption about what happens at age 65. Both of the illustrative examples consider a retiree not yet age 65, so we have to make an assumption about what they will do once they reach Medicare eligibility. Looking at the census data that we received as of June 30, 2019, there was a relatively high portion of the population who were enrolled in a particular Kaiser Medicare offering, so that's what we use for purposes of this analysis. And we just lay out what the premiums are as of January 1, 2020 for these particular plans. We're going to assume that the CERBIT achieves 6.5% rate of return, and that all assumptions for mortality and PEMCA, maximum contributions, PEMCA contributions are consistent with the assumptions we used for the June 30, 2029 evaluation that we recently completed and issued a report. So this chart here just will provide what are the maximum contributions under both Tier 2 and Tier 3. So under Tier 2, you can see the pre-65 for single, 2-party, and family coverage, what those maximum contributions are. Once a retiree hits Medicare eligibility, they're going to get whatever their Medicare premium is, because Medicare premiums are generally lower than their pre-65 premium, and the city does not lower their cap once a retiree reaches age 65. Under PEMCA and the service-based subsidy, the maximum contribution is the same in all scenarios. It does not matter what coverage or benefit tier the retiree elects, whether it be single, 2-party, or family. They only will receive $339 per month, which means that the coverage for the dependents is going to be borne entirely by the retiree. Some of the retiree's premium is going to be borne by the retiree. So in this particular example, we're going to assume a male retiree, age 62. He was a member of the CalPERS miscellaneous group. He had 20 years of service. He has a female spouse 3 years younger with a child age 16. So this chart here will show you the present value as of January 2020 of the city's premium contributions towards coverage. So under Tier 2, retiree single coverage, the present value of the city's contributions towards his premiums for his lifetime will be nearly $94,000. If he decides to cover his spouse, it will double, a little bit more than double, because she is younger and has a little better mortality. And then under family, the additional child cost for the limited amount of time that you're going to cover a child. Under Tier 3, you'll see that the present value much less, and they don't increase as the tier would increase. Again, the contribution would be the same under all coverage scenarios. So a pretty significant reduction in present value, especially in tier with a two-party and family coverage. Second example, we're going to assume a male retiree slightly younger, member of the CalPERS police group, again, 20 years of service at retirement, female spouse, 54, again, an age 16 dependent child. And this chart is going to tell much the same story. The present values are a little bit higher because this retiree will be collecting benefits over a longer period of time, but the savings under Tier 3 are similar on a percentage basis. But as I want to point out, this tier was just implemented for miscellaneous employees hired after December 1st, 2018. So we don't have a large number of the covered population who will be subject to Tier 3 once they retire. That will take time. But as time goes on and more active employees become, this tier applies to them, there will come a time when people will retire under this tier. It may take 10, 15 years before you start seeing it, but the cost of benefits that accrue during the year, that normal cost I talked about earlier, as more and more active employees become eligible for this tier, that normal cost should start to decrease because their benefit is not as generous, which will lower the city's actually determined contribution and just in general lower contribution requirements. So yeah, as you would probably, a reduction in benefits or a less generous benefit tier for new hires is going to result in a lower contribution going forward, which was the intended consequence. That's what the city's intent was, I'm sure.
And with that, we'd be open to answering any questions.
One of the questions on this particular slide, the first was that these numbers scale, so on the first column, the vesting schedule Tier 2, these numbers scale every year based on Kaiser's rates, correct? So the 767, the 1461, so every year Kaiser increases their rates by more than double digits. So these should increase by double digits every year, and there's nothing we can do about that, right?
Tier 2 actually, and Ken might be able to speak, those rates are set by the state. Tier 2, Tier 1, your Tier 1 is 85% of the Kaiser premium.
Okay.
But whether it's Tier 1 or Tier 2, you're exactly correct. Those rates will increase. For purposes of our evaluation, we have trend rates that we apply to these, and they're disclosed, I believe, on either page 9 or page 10 of our report.
Right.
So I use those increase rates as a basis to determine these present values.
Right.
Okay?
So there's no cost control there per se based on the way those, right, okay.
Yes.
Second question, you made a statement, and I just wanted you to stretch this statement out a little further and kind of explain that to me, but you said something about the city does not lower the cap at 65.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that for Tier 2?
Okay, so for instance, for single coverage Tier 2, it's $767 a month. That's a maximum contribution.
Right.
When a retiree hits age 65, we compare that $767 to their Medicare premium.
Right.
Medicare premiums are generally, I think we all, lower than pre-65 coverage. So when it comes time when a retiree reaches age 65, their premium is going to be lower than that $767. So they're going to get their full Medicare premium. There's not going to be any cuts there.
So let's say the Medicare premium was $500 a month.
Yep.
Would they pocket $267, or where does that additional, no?
The city's contribution can never exceed what the retiree is paying for. They can't pocket it.
Okay, so the premium, so whatever the Medicare premium is what we pay up to.
Yeah,
that,
so
right?
in this instance here, let's say the pre-65 premium is $800. They would have to pay some.
Right.
But once they hit age 65, that's going to be much less than $767.
Sure.
They'll have the whole thing provided.
Okay, so right now it's the 85% the city covers, they have the 15%. Before that, but typically when they turn 65, the city covers the 100%, is that?
The way their formula works, yeah, that's what's going to happen.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I had for now.
I'm going to open up public comment.
Hi, my name is Alicia Minion, and I want to thank the mayor and council and staff for creating a committee to address the OPEB. And I also want to thank the actuary for coming and speaking to the OPEB committee and to the audience. And I was in the audience, took time off work to go. And I really appreciate that I was able to ask questions freely, as many as I wanted. And the actuary sat down with us and answered our questions. And I learned so much since the committee has started. I think through this process, we can learn the true meaning of this liability, what it means. And I absolutely love the slide that the actuary made with the pie, with the orange. So you could see all the aspects and kind of the allocation of that liability to 4 different kind of categories, reasons. And that post 65 really stuck out to me. Before the committee was formed, I had no idea that the city covered health, Medicare, supplemental health care premiums after the age of 65. I thought it ended at 65 because I'm not 65 yet, so I don't know how Medicare works. So I had to call my mom. So I called my mom and I said, hey, Mom, what do you pay for Medicare supplemental? She says, I pay $30 a month. And then I got the schedules for the PEMCA, and Medicare supplemental is $300 to $500. So I think that requires further investigation. I don't know if it's really too high, that what the city is paying, or, but anyway, my mom lives in Roseville, so it's a different county, and I know the Medicare supplemental rates vary by county, but I thought that something that requires further investigation. But I really wanted to come up and say thank you so much.
A quick question. How would you, and this is a super hard question, everyone I've asked, I can't, it's hard to figure out. How would you assign a cash value, a portable cash value to a plan like this? Like how would you, so one of the problems we have a lot of times, and you hear a lot in the newspaper and a lot on, is comparing benefits to benefits, or apples to apples, right? And so there's not a lot of cities that have the exact same OPEB plan that we do. How would you assign a cash value to that plan so you can compare salary packages? Because that's one of the things we almost can never do. Is there a way to do that?
In my career as an actuary, I know that in some of my former employers, they would do what's called benefit indexes. Okay. They would look at all the benefits that are offered by a particular, this was when I worked in the private sector. And it was often, companies would always be looking to see, how do our benefits packages compare to our competitors? Knowing that not every company offers the same kind of benefits. I mean, the benefits they do offer, they offer different levels of benefits. Right. How do you normalize that? Right. I would have to ask around Milliman, because Milliman, we have offices all over the country. Maybe we do have something that for California entities that would help you compare that. I mean, Milliman has offices in Anaheim, San Francisco. So even though I sit in a desk in Virginia, I do a phone call away, a simple phone call, I can ask. So the least I can do is find that information out if the city would like to know if there's anything out there that would be helpful along those lines. Something I can't answer easily right now, but something I could look into.
Thank you.
If it interests you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
So I have one semi-serious question and one not. For the $339 per month, is that something that I do understand that there is a issue with unfunded liabilities, but is that going to be an issue while trying to recruit hires? Is that package for healthcare going to be a thing that has people step away from the city? Because that is a problem. And then how many 62-year-olds have 16-year-olds? Sorry.
Your point's well taken. It was just, we wanted to show something, sort of, you think of it as I don't think we would call it a worst case. It would maximum liability a city would incur for a retiree. I would be willing to bet, though, maybe in the census data, I could find one, but their point's well taken. But just these are illustrative examples. So
I'm going to close public comment, and I appreciate that you brought that up. And I just gave a speech to the Chamber of Commerce, and they brought the same question up. And that's the delicate balance. Is, we're competing against other cities to keep this staff the best we can have. And so when we start slashing, and you see it on social media, and people are writing in the paper, oh, we're going bankrupt, let's slash everything. Well, these folks won't stay here. These are the best folks we can have. They'll go somewhere else. So I do appreciate that. That's a balance we have to look at. Do we take everything out and save us from unfunded liability? But then we don't have a staff that can run the city anymore. So I do appreciate you bringing that up. Councilmember Mashburn.
That aside, I like to keep things simple. So there's been much ado made about this issue in the press here in Solano County. And that said, I'd like to clear the air on some things. The first is that you made an analogy, and again, keeping it simple, about a mortgage payment, right? So to put this in that frame, the city is making its mortgage payments right now, right? Fully. We're paying extra, right? We're paying ahead. And basically what I hear, given the presentation today, is that we're going to pay the house off in 19 years if we keep making our payments like we are.
That's the plan.
That's the plan.
Yep.
And to date, the city hasn't missed a payment?
Well, the city has, since the new funding.
Since the new policy?
Yes. Because
So
the reason why you have an unfunded liability is prior to the policy.
So the policy that was implemented by the prior council, three of whom are sitting here right now, was a sound policy that has moved us a third of the way at $38 million towards funding our $78 million liability, correct?
That's correct.
And as long as we continue to do that, the city's not going to go bankrupt, right? I mean, you can't speak to the city's finances. You can't. Let me just say to the public out there.
If I could see that in a crystal ball, I shouldn't be sitting here in front of you.
I can say to the public out there, the city is not going to go bankrupt. The city's making their house payment. The city is paying this off. Your city staff put a lot of thought and a lot of work into making sure that we developed a policy that was sound and that was going to cover this debt over a reasonable period of time shorter than what was required to create the debt. And the public need not panic or worry or fear that this is going to push Vacaville over some precipice and we're gonna crash. This is a model policy that in the future moving forward, hopefully other councils will use in Vacaville and maybe in California and other areas to be able to fund some of the retirement pensions that we need to work on. That is a very significant issue. But I just wanted to get that out there, that we're not going broke, we're paying our bills, and we're not going to go bankrupt.
Councilmember Harris.
I want to say thank you very much, staff, and I'm sorry, your name again? Okay, thank you for being here tonight and for actually attending the meeting where you were able to provide this information ahead of time to the committee. I think even though it was somewhat difficult for us to make that decision to create that committee, it has been a very good step in creating that additional transparency that some members of our community needed and wanted to get their questions answered. So I want to say thank you very much for the work that you've done for our city on behalf of, its citizenry. And I also want to say that I'm proud of the work that we've done as a council to address the unfunded liability. The last few years, we've been hit pretty hard from a lot of different directions about our unfunded liabilities. But in actuality, as has been mentioned by, Councilmember Mashburn, we worked hard to arrive at, in conjunction with our staff, to arrive at a policy that was going to be suitable for us for this period of time and have an end to that liability. So I'm personally proud of the work that we've done.
And to go further on Councilmember Harris's comments, we really need to thank our staff. Everything's a negotiation, and our staff gets hammered all the time by the public saying they get paid too much, their medical is too expensive, their premium packages, but they step up. They've stepped up ever since I've got on this council back in 2008. Year after year, they've given up their benefits, they've given up their wages. And again, as we come out of this recession and we've been heading in a good direction, we went back and took their medical away. And I thank the staff. The staff stepped up and made our job a lot easier. So I appreciate all of the staff that has come forward with us. Vice Mayor Beatty. I'm going to give it to you. There you
Bam,
go.
there it is. I'm basically just going to repeat everything that everybody has already said. It's really a big night. I just want to focus on that. It's a big night. A milestone for me is to hear an actuary actually say it's better to be lucky than good. I've never heard an actuary say that before, but interesting. I'll have to remember that. But I do want to thank the work that you've done and your company and the staff especially. So I told you I'm going to be repeating what everyone's already said already, but the length that staff has gone to not even meet halfway, just to sacrifice. The city is so grateful for what you've done. And I'm grateful for previous council that saw a train coming when not everyone saw the train coming and start taking steps in advance to make sure we could manage it. So it's really a big night for Vacaville. Get this information, know that we have a handle on it, we're moving forward. It's really exciting times, and thank you for all the work that you've done.
I'll entertain motion. Item 10, reports of the city manager. Mr. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. Just two quick items this evening. One, kind of in conjunction with what we just discussed. The OPEB Advisory Committee has met twice in the month of January, really doing some base level information. The staff's given presentations on our programs. Actually, I was able to spend a great deal of time yesterday walking through the study you just received. But I did want to mention, we did create an engagement on Let's Talk Vacaville. That will contain all the data and information that the committee is reviewing is going to be posted out to that engagement. So it's an opportunity for the general public. For example, now that we've received the 2019 report, we'll be loading that out, and all our extra reports since 2008 are already out on that site. In addition to letting people know when the next meeting's going to be, and as information is shared, putting it out there. So we really want an opportunity for a broader part of the community that maybe can't be here when they meet in the afternoons to be able to, at their own leisure, to go to Let's Talk Vacaville. Enter that. They can also enter their email address, and it will notify them when any new data is posted to the site. So they can stay abreast over the next 100 days while we finish that study. That's all available to them. Secondly, I want to mention, was mentioned during public comments, the homelessness issue, and I think I've communicated the most to council, but I think it's important for the community to know, we're taking a step back, reaching out. Hopefully, we're going to get in contact with the county and begin working at a staff level to see how we can put together some basic understanding with the city and the county, how we can begin moving forward as a team and addressing the homeless situation. And hopefully, as we get to that level, then the mayor's talked about engaging the community in that discussion in a broader sense. But I think it's really important that the city and the county at a staff level really work together and get a good understanding of kind of where we are moving forward. And then we'll come back to the mayor and the council and invite some public participation at that point. But I think it's important for the community to understand it's not we're not looking at it. It's just we really think it's a good time to do a reset. Get those understandings in place between the two cities, the city and the county, and then engage the public at an appropriate time.
Thank you, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I did go on record saying that I wanted to put something together, and with that, I want to make sure we do it right, and it's not just something to put a Band-Aid on everything. I want to make sure the community's involved, because the community hasn't been involved, and we definitely have to have the county on board. And when I say on board, I want them on board with us, not on their own board. So with that, I will move to item 11, reports of the city council. You want me to start with my report, or do you want to jump in?
I just got a real quick one.
Sure. No, go ahead. Councilmember
Super
Sullivan.
quick. So I actually just wanted to chime in on that same topic. I wanted to thank the mayor for his leadership and his willingness to get some citizen voice in the discussion about homelessness. So I just really commend you taking that step, and I appreciate it. The second piece is the Homeless Roundtable is an awesome group. It's a group of citizens and different government agencies chaired by the police chief, who does an amazing job kind of keeping that group moving forward. We are meeting tomorrow to discuss the Downtown Streets program, which is fantastic. So we'll have a coalition of different folks that want to talk about downtown streets. It's a really, 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 and I can't say really enough times, cool and effective program to get homeless folks back to work. So it really takes folks that are under the bridge, downtrodden, kind of on the street, gives them 6 months to a year to really get back on their feet and get a job. I think the one thing most folks can agree on when it comes to homelessness is that we want to get people back to work and get them self-sufficient. It's an amazing program. It's in use all over California. It's really my hope that we bring it here to Vacaville. And we have a group of really dedicated citizens and folks and city staff that are meeting tomorrow at the normal Homeless Roundtable meeting time to discuss that. It is open to the public. I believe it's 3 o'clock in AB if anyone wants to come, but very excited. So thank you again for the leadership on the homeless issue.
Thank you. We'll move to the approval of the 2020 City Council assignments. Most of them are staying the same, but I'm going to run through them. The A-bag will be myself and Mashburn. The Citizens Advisory Committee will be Beatty. The City of Vacaville Audit Review will be Sullivan and Beatty. The Play for All Task Force Committee will be myself. Solano County Water Agency is always the mayor and vice mayor. Solano Irrigation District Master Agreement Subcommittee, I'd like to put Harris and Mashburn on there. Solano Transportation Authority is the mayor and vice mayor. Solano Water Authority is the mayor and vice mayor. The Travis Regional Armed Forces Committee, I'll be appointing Beatty and myself. The Vacaville Dixon Greenbelt Authority, I'll be appointing Beatty and Harris. The Vacaville Fairfield Greenbelt Authority, I'll be appointing Beatty and Sullivan. And the Yellow Solano Air Quality Management, I'll be appointing Harris and Sullivan. And if I can get a motion for accept.
Second.
Oh, hold on, Councilmember Harris.
Clarification on the
Yes.
TCC, you didn't mention the TCC?
Yeah, that's appointed at a different time, but you're on it.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Not for this, no. No, this is.
What Greenbelt switch? Sorry, real quick. What Greenbelt?
Yes. You want the public comment? Sure. All right, let's do it. Come on up.
I'm just curious why, no offense, but Vice Mayor Beatty, who was appointed to this position, has 8 appointments. That compared to, I think, Nolan had 3, Harris, I think you had 4. That just, I know a couple of them are mayor, vice mayor, but just throwing that out there.
Sure, I appreciate it. Seeing no other, I'm going to close comment. Entertain that motion.
Super quick
I'll make a
question.
motion.
Which Greenbelt? I'm sorry.
Oh, I apologize.
Sorry, you just said it fast.
You're the Fairfield.
Fairfield?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Vacaville Fairfield is Sullivan Beatty.
Thank you.
I had a motion. Do I have a second?
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous. And then we'll move to item 13, which is our closed session. I'll open it up for public comment if anybody wants to make comment on our closed session. If not, I'll close that and there'll be no actions. So good night, Vacaville. Thank you.